I'll raise that and discuss in the next steps as well at the end of our session. But I also really just wanted to welcome you all and thank you so much for making the time, because I know it's either super early in London on a Wednesday, or it's infringing on Ramadan working hours. So thank you so much for joining and making the time. This is a very important event because it is our very first event in our Education and Fragility Learning series. Essentially, what we want to do, what we're working on in the GEC right now, is building a bit of a better and more consolidated research and evidence and practice base around what's happening in some of our most difficult contexts. And so we've developed a little community of practice amongst ourselves, either our implementing partners working in severe active conflict zones or projects and implementing partners working in areas of intermittent fragility and frequent or just prevalent pockets of fragility in various ways. And so we've developed this little community of practice and have these plans. So our focus today is basically on what you all signed up for, and learning a little bit about how our GEC implementing partners are navigating these extreme weather circumstances and climate change. Some of this fragility and education learning series has actually been inspired by interest on both our fund manager as well as FCDO side in terms of how do our implementing partners keep things going when it's really difficult. It kind of was inspired by that question. Especially given that we know fragility is inherently unpredictable, very complex, and it amplifies pre-existing barriers to girls' education and programming, including early marriage, poverty, and so on. So a couple of the reasons why we wanted to focus on this subject today in particular as our first session within this learning series, and our other series planning includes, a focus on monitoring, includes a focus on safeguarding in fragile contexts. How do you approach that? But our focus today is really just on that extreme weather circumstances, given that they are extremely, urgent and on the rise. So the events that we've been seeing are increasing in their severity and their prevalence. And so the urgency is really high to address this or kind of really learn what's happening. How are projects managing this, especially when they're not set up to be a climate change or emergency response program as such? So there's a lot of research that shows that basically climate change impacts are exacerbating the existing inequalities to learning or education access. And with all of the learning coming from our GEC partners on climate change resilience, we thought it would be a really great opportunity to share with you all what is happening there, and also what's happening from three very different contexts and three very different approaches to this issue on resilience in climate change. So that's just the broad overview. I know I'm overstepping and I feel like we might be a little bit, no, we're actually good on time. So yeah, we just wanted to do the welcomes, housekeeping and overview on that in terms of the series, in terms of particular topic and our goal today. And then, as you can see from the lineup, we're going to be hearing from CARE Somalia and learning about effective adaptations to address the intersection of drought, conflict, and resource scarcity in Somalia. We're then going to hear from PIN Nepal on systems-level approaches to disaster risk resilience in Nepal. And then we're going to be hearing from AKF Afghanistan on lessons learned on a particular innovation, actually, on their flexible response funding. So then after that, we're going to open it up to questions and discussion. Hopefully we'll hear a lot from Atik supporting us to bring the ideas together and flesh out further learning and audience ideas. And we might even be hearing from FCDO and Camilla Pankhurst. I think, I'm not sure, can't see the people in the room, but if you're here, it'll be really wonderful to also see any relevancy to our discussion and what's happening at FCDO's side on the policy level. And kind of going back to that bigger aim of the series in terms of better tightening the link between practice and policy. And then we can go over next steps. So that's the broad overview of the day. And I want to hand over to Atik and Ellie because I probably forgot something and before we introduce the speakers. Is there anything else that we should be doing or a technical issue we should be resolving before we dive in?
I think it's fine, Sherry. I think we can go ahead.
Great. Yeah. Okay, so pardon me for 1 minute. I'm just going to introduce our first speaker from CARE. Paul is an experienced development specialist with over 17 years in management, coordination, and implementation and monitoring evaluation of international development projects, with 8 years spent in providing technical leadership in setting up and managing M&E systems. He is currently the monitoring and evaluation manager for the Girls Education Program in Somalia, the Ages one, which is a 6-year program jointly funded by US and UK. We'll also be hearing from Kenneth, who is the monitoring and evaluation coordinator for CARE, Somalia Rural Women Program. He was the monitoring and knowledge manager for the CARE SOMGEP program in Somalia also, and he led the design and rollout of a very sophisticated monitoring system to track output level data and fidelity of implementation parameters for the GEC-SOMGEP project. And you'll see a lot of that really exciting monitoring evidence come out in their presentation. So yeah, without further ado, Paul and Kenneth, thank you so much. I'll go back to my presentation and you guys can start us off on your learnings from CARE Somalia. I'll turn off my camera, actually, and you can turn on yours.
Hi, can you hear me and can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. So I'll be waiting for the slides to appear on the screen. I hope they're come from your end.
Can you see my slides, Kenneth, and others?
No, we can't see him, Sherry.
Yeah, okay, now the slides are there. So basically, I'll be giving an introduction part of this presentation for CARE Somalia, and we are presenting for 2 projects. The first project is the Somali Girls Education Project, which is the in transition, and then the the Adolescent Girls Education Project in Somalia, the AGES project. Now, our presentation is based on fragility in Somalia, and I'm going to base this basically on environmental factors. So Somalia experiences frequent climate-related shocks that usually have devastating impact on the lives of the households. Now, the most common of these are basically drought and intermittent flooding that devastates riverine agricultural areas. For example, the drought of the 2010-2011 was of a different magnitude due to the El Nino weather cycle, and it triggered an official declaration of famine. Now, recently, according to the FWSNet and partners, the 2021 rain season is among the worst since 1981 and the poorest cereal harvest since 1995. Now, and then according to the Sabul Journal for Somali Agriculture, March 2020, Somalia has suffered from severe floods on regular basis, with the most severe in 2006, 2011, and 2012. Now, before the Civil War, that is before 1991, structural measures to mitigate and control floods included construction of dikes, barrages, and flood relief canals. Now, these regulation structures are in disrepair and no longer reliable because of the ongoing war. Next slide. Now, I'll talk about some of the challenges related to these environmental related disasters. Now, as I have said, the main contextual factor here is environmental, and this is based on the ongoing drought and intermittent flooding, which have devastated river and agricultural areas. Now, some of the highlights, I'm now going to share some of the most recent challenges resulting from this drought and flooding. So some of the highlights from the Somali Situation Report, number 3, as of 20th January 2022 include: 1, the 2021 DER, which is the October to December rain season, failed, and that aggravated severe drought in parts of Somalia. Now, there is disease outbreaks, mainly due to lack of access to clean and sufficient water and hygiene services. And these are reported on the rise as drought worsens, and more people are displaced into congested settlements. Number 3, the worsening drought has affected over 3.2 million people in 66 out of the 74 districts, of whom 245,000 are internally displaced. And then number 4, families are flocking into towns, and others are crossing into the neighboring Ethiopia in search of humanitarian assistance. And then the last one, there is resource-based conflicts, which have been reported involving armed clashes over ownership of grazing land. Next slide. Now, in this slide, I'm going to cover some of the other factors that are contributing to the fragility. The first one I've just mentioned is about environmental, but there are other factors. Now, some of these other factors that are contributing to the fragility, I'll share them in 3 different categories. The first one are the ones affecting AGS project alone. Then the next one, the ones that are only affecting SOMJEP-T, and then the last one, the ones that are common to the 2 projects. Now, there are 2 that are specific to the AGS based on the area in which the project is being implemented, and that is the long-running military conflict, especially between Al-Shabaab and various militia groups. This is mainly in south-central area of Somalia, where AGS project is being implemented. And the second one is the political conflict between the government and opposition groups over the delayed elections. The elections ought to have been done last year in January, but they were just concluded this year, last month. So there's been a lot of tension. Now, the one that is specific to SOMJEP-T is severe droughts. And this is because SOMJEP-T is covering the northern parts of Somalia, which is generally drier compared to the south central where AGS is. Now, there are others that are now common to these 2 projects, and that is the political conflict between the federal member states and the federal government of Somalia. That is covering both projects, affecting both projects. And then the next one is the frequent and ongoing environmental shocks, the one I've just talked about, that is basically droughts and flooding. And then there is the economic fluctuations. And then lastly, there is locust infestation that was experienced last year. Thank you. I'll hand over to my colleague, Kenneth, to proceed with the remaining parts.
Thank you so much, Paul. I'm not sure what is happening, but I'm not able to see the screen. Is there to share from my end? Sherry.
Kenneth, we can see the screen. Kenneth, are you there?
Yeah, I'm trying to. Yeah. Can you see my screen now?
We were able to see the screen. I don't know. It's gone blank for me.
Yeah, it's blank.
Can you see it now?
No, I think Sherry, were you presenting? Oh, you can see it, Camilla. Okay, maybe it's just for me.
I cannot. Sherry, are you sharing your slides?
Yeah, exactly. I was sharing and it kind of just went blank. I'm not sure. So let me go back. Kenneth, no need to worry about sharing your screen because I have it on screen and I think people can see it now. Can you see it?
Okay.
Can you see
No,
this?
it's okay. Yeah, okay. So no, that's okay.
Okay, good. Yeah. So we're on the implications.
No, I think I can. Yep, I will proceed. Thank you very much, Paul. So the remaining part of this presentation looks at the systems that we have put in place to understand better the effects of the natural disasters. And I also look at the adaptations that we've implemented and the impact of those adaptations in achieving project learning outcomes. So when disaster strikes, I think first and foremost, we need to be agile to any challenges. So there is always a need and to intervene. And so it's important to act quickly, but it is not only about speed. We need to be able to provide proper support to the right groups at the right time. So this really requires us to have very robust monitoring and evaluation system to inform adaptive management. So as CARE, we have designed our systems to detect those lagging or be able to track or surface hidden marginalized groups who are often difficult to track. So in total, the AGIS project and SOMJE project, we are supporting over 400 schools, and considering those schools that we are supporting, it will be very, very challenging for us to be able to intervene in all these areas. So that's why it is really very important to identify or spot those who are really lagging and be able to establish exactly where they are and why are they really struggling. So once we have better understanding are struggling, we'll be able to adjust our programs to address poor performance among specific groups. And sometimes we make changes in activity design. We also modify the layering and sequencing of activities. And there are instances where we can add or remove components, as well as making broader changes, fear of change. You can move on to the next slide, please. Okay. Okay. So, so I will, because I cannot see Sherry, so I will on the next slide.
It should be on the next slide called implications on education programming. Do you see that? Do people see?
Yeah, okay, thanks. So, so on this one, I would like to share the key implications of the national disasters on education. So over the years, we've been monitoring the implications of these disasters on education programming, and in particular, those that have proved to have a bearing on learning outcomes. And some of the significant impact of these natural disasters one, which is really a major issue, is irregular attendance, particularly among older girls, because of we have child burden, as well as high really dropouts due to migration, especially girls from pastoralist communities. So during disasters as well, some schools closed temporarily, resulting in real learning losses, especially in areas that have limited digital technology and those with poor remote learning support. We have also witnessed very high mental health prevalence during disasters, especially adolescent girls. And evidence from our own evaluation shows that anxiety and depression have a very strong bearing on learning outcomes as well as transition. So that's why the reduction or tracking of mental health prevalence is really of interest to us. And was also realized that low-income families, they lose their livelihoods and they struggle to provide the basic education necessities. And these disasters also cause high attrition of teachers due to delays or failure by community education committee to pay their incentives. So all these disasters, they lead to really significant learning losses. Can you proceed to the next slide, please? Okay, so I mean, despite the Aegis and SOMJEP operating in two different operational areas, but most of the adaptations are really similar. We all work with the Ministry of Education, and we also support the Community Education Committee, which is a school governance structure, to address irregular tendencies, dropouts through intensifying enrollment campaigns, particularly targeting, as I said, there is a lot of focus on ultra-marginalized groups, including girls from minority communities and those from pastoralist community and girls with disability. So we also work with the CCs to minimize learning losses by providing remedial lessons. In these remedial lessons, as I said, we are supporting over 400 schools. So we target mainly struggling schools. And we also work with Ministry of Education and the teachers to ensure that they're able to provide remedial support to struggling students. And as a project, we also complement the learning by providing reading books. So the SOMJEP, which is operating in the north, they also provided tablets to teachers and share the Ministry of Education e-lessons. Yeah, now I can see the slide. Yeah, thank you. So one of the most important intervention is the visual engagement. So the project created group forums for girls leaders and school support. So these online forums enabled the project to continue providing support to continue learning. So we also worked with the Ministry of Education to train teachers and women mentors so that they're able to provide essential basic psychosocial support to girls who are facing anxiety and depression issues. So on this one, I would like to share the impact of some of the interventions, in particular the impact of the project adaptations on particular subgroups of interest. I think as we're all aware, this is really in sync with the GC and the LNGB strategic focus in terms of demonstrating project impact on the most marginalized groups. So Aegis recently conducted a very comprehensive assessment to assess attendance and transition and retention rates. And when we look at the transition rates between minority and non-minority groups and the transition rate between girls with a disability and those with a disability, so there is no longer any disparities. So they're basically the same. And this is really a significant accomplishment because there was a vast disparity at the project's inception. And the project also observed high retention rates at 92% and 94% of girls enrolled in non-formal education and accelerated basic ed. So this also shows the impact of the NFE and AB activity, which mainly targets out of school girls. And the project also successfully in supporting at-risk girls. Access to remote learning increased progressively among participant girls, with highest use rates being observed among those facing deprivation of basic needs. As I indicated earlier on, the project supports CCs, teachers, and GF to conduct follow-up on absentee girls. And based on the assessment, we've realized that 98% of the girls who had been absent from school indicated that a teacher had followed up with them. And also some of them that were followed up by the CCs and the GF. Enrollment drives, what we can conclude based on these results, enrollment drives conducted by the teachers and CCs and significantly impacted on re-enrollment. You can move to the next slide, please. Okay, so for SOMJEP, so as part of the project evaluation, the SOMJEP looked at the impact of adaptations on learning. In the evaluation, we're using a quest experimental design where we are comparing treatment and comparison score. And we had a cohort of girls that we have been monitoring over the past 4 yes, around 1,700 girls. Based on the results of the final evaluation, we realized that overall, there was no statistical significant difference that we observed in the baseline and endline comparison. But then when we also look at the results in terms of in-school girls, the difference was really, really very, very marginal. But for out-of-school girls, the girls in intervention schools, they performed better than the girls in comparison schools. Though the results not significant, but it's really a very positive trend. But then the poor performance itself resulted from the impact of drought, migration, and displacement, and also potentially as a result of COVID. But when we look at the learning outcomes, when you look at the table, the learning outcome for particular subgroups is shown in the table. So the project had much more significant gains among ultra-marginalized groups of schoolgirls, particularly girls from pastoralist communities and girls with a disability. And this also indicates that the subsequent adaptations successfully realized the GC goal of making a difference for the most marginalized groups. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul and Kenneth, for that. I think it was just very interesting to hear, and also for our audience to kind of get ready for our next presentations and discussion. Kind of almost a wide menu of options and adaptations that you use, kind of interlinked with each other to address all these various aspects of these barriers the girls are facing at this juncture, whether it's resource allocation, whether it's remote learning that has an impact and you measure that, follow up, or working with communities to build the resilience. So yeah, very interesting work. And thank you again, Paul and Kenneth. And everyone, if you don't mind, just keeping track of your questions as well, because we do want to go on to our next presenter. And that will be with PIN Nepal and Bharat. Bharat is head of programs for People in Need, Nepal. He's been managing the LNGB Ahambra project in 2 provinces since 2018. Prior to that, Bharat worked at FHI 360 as a program specialist, working on HIV prevention in some of the most marginalized communities in Nepal. He also co-founded an education organization which focused on mobilization of youth clubs. So very interesting background, which makes a lot of sense to the kind of mobilization and whole community approach and whole system approach that we're going to hear from Nepal. So Bharat, without further ado, if you don't mind, leading us through your learning.
Thank you, Sharon. I hope I'm audible and also visible for a moment. Can you confirm, please?
Perfect.
Yeah, okay. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Sharon, for the introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, namaste to everyone. I am Bharat. So now I would like to turn off my video for the internet connectivity. So before I start our experience on education and working around disaster risk reduction and climatic impact, I would just like to take a moment to briefly highlight the situation of Nepal itself. So Nepal, as you can see in the map itself, it ranges from a lowest at 70 meters from the sea level to the highest of the Mount Everest in a span of 125 kilometers within. So that poses a great challenge, topographical challenge that invite a lot of climate-induced disaster and hazards almost on an annual basis. So as per the Humanitarian Country Team Report 2016, Nepal is ranked 4th to the climate change impact vulnerability. At the same time, 11th most vulnerable country in the world to the impact of earthquake and 13th most vulnerable to the flood risk. And in between 2004 and 2016, Nepal accounted almost 10% of all rainfall triggered landslide fatalities in the world, which is a lot given that Nepal only compromises less than 1% of the world's land area. Next, please. And it is expected that by 2050, Nepal is expected to have extreme rainfall with increment up to 52%, increasing the rise in temperature, leading to drought and increased risk of flood and fire. This is the estimate from USAID that they prepared climate risk profile Nepal back in 2017. And just to give you some more figures, next please, would you? Yeah, just to give you a bit of a context and what has triggered in the last several years. In 2015, Nepal faced a massive earthquake of more than 7.8 magnitude that displaced approximately 2.8 million people and killing more than 10,000 people. And like Nepal has faced a massive flooding almost every year. In 2017, like over 190,000 households were destroyed, and also flood and landslide make up to two-thirds, three-quarters of all natural disasters occurring in the country. And when we look at the trend in the past 35 years, natural disasters has affected approx 5 million people out of 28 million, and have killed more than 27,000, which is approx, and an average 2 people in a day. Next, please. So that this is the context of Nepal. And coming back to the project, we work in a Madhya province, that is the southern belt belt of the country, which is pretty flat. So it has a high risk of seasonal natural disasters, especially flood, hot and cold waves, fire, tornado, and even drought. So we cover Bara and Rautahar districts from Madhya province. As per Nepal Disaster Report 2019, more than 200 people died due to the natural disaster, especially in our areas. And also, for the first time in Nepal, we witnessed the case of tornado in Bara districts in 2019. So that has triggered a lot of national debate on how we prioritize climate risk and the mainstreaming of this component within all the government plans. During that time, the Bara district had a huge financial loss. And at the same time, as per National Emergency Operations Center, Madhya province was the second largest affected province by natural disasters in Nepal. And to top it up, the province is there are a lot of marginalized community in the context of Nepal, so they often face more impact than the other people when the natural disasters happen, including displacement, internal displacement, the issue of landlessness, and all of that. And we have like disaster and climate change resilience governance mechanism at local level. But since Nepal moved to a new federal from centralized government system to a federal government system, the local government are not fully equipped in terms of preparedness and in terms of responding to these disaster related impacts. Next slides, please. Yeah, talking about the challenges, so we have categorized several challenges in terms of the system structure and the operation itself. So even though national government has authorized several plans and policy for the local government to adapt and implement, but however, given the capacity of the local government itself, most of these plans and policies, in most of the cases, they are not there. But even though in cases where it is present, it's not implemented properly. So that could be the disaster preparedness and response plan, local adaptation plan of action for the climate mitigating measures, and also other disaster risk management planning. And talking about the schools, again, as per the national plans and policy and prioritize minimum enabling conditions under the government guidelines, all these schools, including the community schools, are supposed to have a school improvement plan and contingency plan together with the comprehensive school safety implementation procedure and guideline. But however, due to the lack of resources, due to the capacity of a school management committee, and even the engagement of parents for that matter, like none of these are quite evident in our working areas. And most of like I said at the beginning, the working areas are flatlands, so that are highly prone to flood most of the time. So even the human settlements are in the flood prone area. And there are no proper early warning system in place, so that the communities, including the beneficiary that we work with, do not get alert messages from the government or from other entities, so that they could prepare. So that has been the challenge. Other than that, there are several clusters. There are several cluster in place to mitigate the issue of emergency, but that happens only during the emergency, and little actions are taken during the preparedness and during the planning process. So the impact are usually huge, which are mostly manageable. And these all these challenges ultimately focuses and impacted in a continuous learning and at the schools, because of the policy, because of the preparedness. That would ultimately mean that a lot of our learning centers, a lot of schools had to suspend the project activities, suspend the learning activities for several weeks, sometimes even month during the monsoon period, that they had to close, ultimately impacting the attendance and the regular learning opportunity for the students. Next slide, please. And talking about the project engagement itself. So even though we work with out of school adolescent girls, we have been working very closely with the schools, local government, to ensure, like, to support, especially to develop this disaster preparedness and response plan. At the same time, to prepare contingency planning, not just on the disaster risk reduction, but also on the education plan that is ongoing in most of the local government that we are working. So in many of our working areas, they are developing 10 years education plan through the support of USAID, and our effort has been to engage with all the stakeholders and to ensure that, other than our regular agenda, to also to include the component of DRR, especially in the community schools, to have that plan in place, so that the school can react and also respond to the shock of natural disasters. Apart from that, like, we engage with the local government in terms of during the process of local level planning. So our agenda, other than the regular girls education, gender equitable gender norms, other than those regular agenda that we advocate, we also advocate to allocate resources for school, for SOC responsive social protection component, and also to allocate resources for emergency preparedness, and how we build the infrastructure in a more climate resilient way, and also other infrastructural support. And in our program, we have also started mainstreaming the component of climate change and disaster risk reduction in our curriculum, especially the one on life skill, the workshops that we do with the teachers, school management committee, and the school going adolescent girls and boys. Um, and apart from that, we continuously sorry, can you go to the, yeah, apart from that, we have been really active when it comes to the disaster preparedness and response. So we work with the clusters, district disaster management committee during the times of emergency, to coordinate and to support and to ensure that the beneficiary, especially the project beneficiary, are linked, and they have access to all the emergency support that is there in the community. Together with that, we coordinate with there is a FCDO-led project coherent unit in all the provinces. So we also coordinate with the other FCDO-funded projects that are working especially around emergency disaster, to bring synergy within the program of FCDO. So we collaborate with that. And during the first few years, we experienced that the natural disasters were happening like almost every year. At times, it was so sporadic as well. So during one of our review and adaptation meeting with the fund manager and FCDO, we kind of ensure certain resources budget just to support the local community, especially our beneficiary and the local government that we work with certain emergency support plans. So we do have some emergency support resources in times of in a difficult times to support the local authorities, the schools, and the communities. For example, since 2019 that we have been supporting and coordinating with other stakeholders to support for the annual flood response program, the winter response program, and also during the tornado back in 2019, we coordinated with local government, Red Cross, and other stakeholders to respond to that crisis. Next slide, please. And based on our learning, like it's been more than 3 years that we are in the field, meaning that we have experienced like several disasters during this period, and our engagement with the local government clusters and other actors has been so visible. So because our ultimate aim is to ensure that the natural disasters and its impact shouldn't hamper the learning of school going children and all the girls that are enrolled in our program. So we realized that mainstreaming of climate change and emergency content and context, like that brings synergy between program, not just within the girls education program, but also with the other actors, and also to educate communities on the preparedness part, and also on the response part, and finally to strengthen the governance and the operational capacity of the local government and the school system. While doing so, we realized that it not only like provided immediate support to the beneficiary and community, but also it built the trust between the project and the local government, school, communities, and families, because of which, it has indirectly helped us to get the buy-in of the government to support with the girls' education agenda, to support with the girls' enrollment back to the school. So it was more of a invisible benefit that we have been receiving from the local government and stakeholders doing this kind of small but very important emergency response support. And lastly, it is very much crucial, especially in our context, to support schools and local government in terms of formulating and implementing all the plans, policy in line with what the Nepal government has directed centrally and also from the province, so that they have certain resources, they are prepared for any kind of disaster that may arise, and also to respond on time. I think that is the end of my presentation for now, and I see a couple of comments, but I think we are addressing all the questions at the end. So I'm handing over the presentation to Sherry now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Bharat. That was such an interesting learning, journey that you described to us, and also very different from the kind of interventions that CARE is adopting, in the sense that I guess in the Nepal context, your underlying assumption is that this needs to be built into the project DNA, even if we are set up as education primarily, and just looking at, as much as possible, even budget neutral to some extent, interventions, and in some cases just going back to the way we work in the GEC in terms of this adaptive management approach, and using review and adaptation points to change things up and be able to respond to the context. So yeah, thank you so much again, Bharat. We're now going to hear from AKF. And we're going to be hearing from Abdul Razik Siddiqui, who's worked with AKF in the education department since 2007. He first started as a district teacher educator, and then served as an area officer for education from 2011 to 2014. And now he's the area senior officer for AKF's Bamiyan region in Afghanistan. We'll also be hearing from Abdul Wakil Fikri, who is a national advisor at AKF Afghanistan and has been working with AKF since 2005 in Baghlan, Bamiyan, and Kabul. Wakil started his career as a teacher trainer at AKF and then moved to being an education officer, regional manager, and finally in this national advisor role. Wakil has expertise in early childhood development as he designs and implements early childhood projects at AKF. So, Wakil, if you don't mind saying hello to us on camera, and if the bandwidth allows, you can get started.
Thank you, Shiri, for the introduction. And please have the slide of Afghanistan. Yes. And in Afghanistan, as you know, it is located in it is very high from the sea level. In some of the provinces in the central and northern part of Afghanistan, it is almost 2,000 meter high from the sea level, which this caused that we have a very difficult winter. During the winter, we have a lot of snow in some part of Afghanistan. AKF support the central part and northern provinces of Afghanistan, which we face a lot of snow, and we also there is a lot of mountain. And AKF work in the rural area, and sometime in the winter it cause a challenge for us, for our staff to travel to the village. As you see in the pictures, AKF staff are working on the roads to clean the road for the vehicle to move to go to in the village and provide support to the classes and to the teachers. When we pass a very difficult winter, then during the summer we again face another challenge, which is the landslide and floods in the area that, as you see in the picture, in sometime the floods destroy the bridge to the village. We are in response to this, AKF use other routes, or also we use to change the vehicle to move to those villages and to support, provide support to the teachers. Next, please. Yes, and with these all difficulties, we face some challenge which cause our intervention in the village. For example, high immigration rate in this situation of the heavy snow, and also drought. If there is drought and no water for the field, and people are moved to the cities to do their job, to find another job. And also shortage of water in some of the villages, and increase in food price we face, in school closure, and also high student dropout and turnover. These challenge that we face because of this hard winter and the floods and the COVID-19, and also a political change in conflict in Afghanistan. Next, please. In response to these all challenge, AKF implement and AKF design and implement the activities to respond to this challenge. For example, when there was the COVID lockdown, the student was in their village, in their homes. AKF took the education opportunity to their village through the mobile classes, catch-up classes, which we have established a small group teaching in the village base for the small number of the children through the projector, and rechargeable projector, that also we have designed a home-based guideline for the parents to provide support. And the some of the places near to the center of the districts or the center of the province, where there was the strong internet connection, We have also with our teachers also established the WhatsApp groups with their children and teaching them through WhatsApp, but that was not possible in all places and just in some of those places. Same when there is these other natural disaster, when there is floods and avalanche or heavy snow, when prevent the students to come to the classes. In response to this, AKF provide other intervention ICT materials like projector in their village to have access, the children have access to education and to teaching and learning. Beside these all the intervention, our one of important intervention is flexible response fund, which I focus in these next slides in this presentation. The flexible response fund is a fund, a lump sum fund, which can be used for any activity that provide access to the children to school. And that flexible response fund, when we design and implement the project under the flexible response fund with the support of the community together. As you see in the picture, this is the school shura that we enter to the community through school shura, and we design the intervention for the project to support under the flexible response fund. Next, please. Next slide. Yes, and this is if you see this example here, the one of our example that we have designed it under the FRF Flexible Response Fund, that there was the Tahak CBE classes in Punjab, Bamiyan. There was the river in some village was other side of the river, and this, if you see now, there is not this much water, but at the beginning of academic year, in 2 months of the summer, there is a lot of water here, which prevent children from walking and coming to the class. And AKF, with the support of the community together, they have designed to have a kind of temporary, very local made bridge to that village to provide access to the children. Children come easy and join the classes. Next, please. Yeah, this is another example of where there was no clean water in one of our school in Paiboom Girls High School in Punjab, Bamiyan. The water was up in the mountain, and the children was walking to the mountain to have water during the break time, and there was possibility of the landslide, and also that was difficult for them to walk. Then AKF, in response to this, AKF have designed it with the support of the community together. They have designed a project which bring the water from the mountain to a school. That as you see in the picture, there is a tank, water tank that we established, and we brought the safe drinking water through a pipe from that mountain to this water tank, and children have access to the clean drinking water inside the school. Next, please. And my last example of this presentation is in Darai Mandi Girls Middle School in Punjab, Bamiyan. We are there is a difficult when you move to the school, and on the way there is landslide, and there is no bridge to move to the schools. And then on that time, when for two beginning at the beginning of academic year, for 2 months there, it was difficult for the students, and there was a high dropout in attendance, low attendance rate for the students to come to the school. And AKF just constructed 4 classroom in a safe place where the children can easy access into that place to overcome this challenge, and for the students, that the student become able to come to the class and present to the class. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Wakil John and Razik John, for that really illustrative presentation and discussion on the challenges there in Afghanistan, as well as also challenging, when we think of Afghanistan, I think the first thing that might come to some of our minds is the active conflict. So we do forget about how severe this context is in terms of other aspects of fragility, and really empowering communities to make priority decisions on implementation and how to enable access to education. So thank you guys so much. Before we go to the Q&A, I just wanted to also share some research. If you guys remember, at the beginning of our discussion, we opened up trying to basically explain the issue around the urgency of this conversation and the linkage between how fragility in the climate change department basically is exacerbating education inequalities. So we wanted to share some research to that end without boring you with tons of stats at the beginning, because a lot of the research that's been noted by UNICEF, UNESCO, academic journals has also been touched on in the challenges that our presenters have described here today in just more practical and specific terms throughout their context. So if you're working on advocacy around this area, if you want to learn more about it and want other global evidence bases, they're here in the chat. So there's a couple of evidence bases there for you to draw upon in terms of just good literature we've found that are speaking to this particular subject. And I also conclude with a little lessons from COVID-19 experience coming from the GEC, because a lot of the interventions and crisis response mechanisms that we're hearing about today overlap with some of the learnings that we've had from COVID. So that might be a useful refresher too that I've added there. Sorry for that. It was a little bit of a derail, but wanted you guys to have that, especially our audience. And Atiq, any ideas to kick us off with our Q&A, or actually takeaways, or something that you want to share, having heard these presentations after lots of discussions internally amongst ourselves and the working group working on this. Yeah, over to you, Atiq.
Thanks, Sherry. Firstly, I'd just like to say, thank you to CarePin and AKF. And I think one of the most inspiring things that has come out of today is the fact that these projects have been operating over the last 2 years in an environment that has not only brought on climate change related disasters, but also the COVID pandemic, and to actually manage and implement during such a crisis has been remarkable. So firstly, I'd like to commend, the efforts of the projects today, and so to say, what a remarkable job. But yeah, just in terms of questions, I'd like to pose a question to each of the projects, and would like to ask them, if they were to give any advice to any of the people on the call today about how they responded to some of the disasters, and what would be one of your key takeaways. So one recommendation that you could perhaps give everyone today, because I know there was a lot packaged in your presentations, but what is one key thing that you would advise another project who may be dealing with the similar issues? So perhaps we can come to Bharat from PIN first to answer that. And then in the meantime, if you do have any questions, please do raise your hand. I think we want to make this a little bit more of a discussion than just posting comments in the chat. So do raise your hands and then we'll ask the remaining questions after. So Bharat, over to you.
Thank you, Atik. I kind of like missed out the last portion of your question. Could you please repeat, Atik?
Yeah, so what is one key takeaway that you would like to present to other projects from your learning of dealing with climate change and resilience?
Thank you. I mean, these issues are very pertinent and it's very visible, not just within the project, but from the other project that we have been doing within PIN Nepal here. We have observed like how, you know, the impact of climate change are quite visible in our daily life. So my key takeaways would be like, you know, like how we mainstream the component like we do for, let's say, JETSI, or we do for other several agenda, like how climate change need to be integrated into not just in the education program, but in also all the other programs, because it affects everyone, especially in education, because it involves children's learning, the continuous learning is, and in the context of, in a countries like ours, when there is a disruption in, let's say, the learning environments, either that be COVID-19 or natural disaster or even human-made crisis, you know, the chances are high that the impact, especially with the girls and the young kids, to drop out of the schools. And we have already started seeing its impact. So I think to address these would be crucial, and how we mainstream all these components within the program and design the teaching learning and also the project in a way that would also address these concerns in coming days. Thank you, Atik.
Thanks, Bharat. And I think that's really important, the last point that you made in terms of mainstreaming it through every part of the program, whether that's teaching, learning, or Jesse. Great. Maybe we can come to Care next.
This is from the Ages project, and this is Paul. The one key thing or takeaway is that from our experience, we've realized that since the climate change factors are something that are regular, now there is need for us to develop a blended kind of education program, blended in the form that it can allow remote learning as well as in-person, so that during the time that things are good, we switch over to in-person learning. And when things are, when we are hit with a disaster, we straight away easily switch on to the remote content learning. So a blended form of learning being in place. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And that's a really interesting point, especially given blended learning, you know, has come to the forefront since the COVID pandemic, and there's so many resources and has sort of shifted the way in which we think about teaching and reaching perhaps those communities that might not have been reached pre-pandemic. And now it's, yeah, sort of become the norm, which is obviously a great thing. Next, we'll come to AKF.
Yes, thank you, Atik. One takeaway that if I talk from my presentation, I will take the Flexible Response Fund project in, which support the initial disaster, and also the when if also with this. I will add this another things that here that under this climate change in this topic, that there is need to work in the school level as well as awareness, and that is good to have peer learning or child approach, where the children can support other children to have the information regarding the climate change, and that is that to bring this topic into the school, into our education system. Thank you.
Thanks, Wakil. I think that you've pointed out there's a real need to think about awareness of these climate change issues and concerns and trying to integrate that into teaching and learning materials and into the curricula. And I'm not sure we're seeing evidence of that happening at a system level. I do know that there are isolated sort of projects that might be doing it at a micro level, but I'm not sure whether that is happening at a much more larger scale. So it would be good perhaps for anyone on the call today if they do have some examples of where it has been taken up at a system level and it is being prioritized. And that sort of brings us on to the Q&A in terms of the chat, the questions that were posted in the chat. Again, if you do have any questions, please do raise your hand, but I'll come to the first one, which I think was partially answered. It came from Faith. What would you say were the mitigation measures for learning loss other than the support from relatives and neighbours? Maybe we can come to Pin first. I know that you've been doing a lot on remote learning and yeah, sort of catch-up classes. So perhaps you can just give a brief update on that.
Yeah, sure, and a great question. I mean, learning loss has been a real challenge, especially during the time of crisis and natural disaster. But having said that, I missed to mention it earlier during the presentation, but we have a model, we developed a model right during the time of pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, the distant teaching learning via mobile phone. So the whole aim of introducing that model during the time of crisis was to ensure that we retain the girls during those closer time, and also to ensure that their learning, learning process are retained. Otherwise, most of the case, what happened is, like I said earlier, I mean, there is a high chance of dropout. At the same time, there is a high chance of reversing the learning for the girls. So that approach is there. And just to add it on, I mean, it is also important because we work with super marginalized girls, meaning that they do not necessarily have on authority, let's say, due to a very restrictive and harmful gender norms that we have in our areas. So we engage the community leaders, especially the religious leaders, as a change champion to advocate and work with their families, and also engage with the family so that the girls, the children, have a regular and stable learning environment, either that going to the school or coming to a temporary learning center, or even learning at home. So that has been our key learning measure. But besides that also, so we all of our educators, the teachers, they are from the local community, like they are pretty familiar with the context, the dynamics, the norms and everything. So we mobilize these local facilitator, the educators, for home visits, for one-on-one learning, and also post crisis situation. We have approached, like what our colleague from Afghanistan was sharing, to for dual modality, like doing one-on-one teaching learning, and then and also the catch-up classes. So there are certain learning interventions that we are already implementing post COVID period, just to ensure that the learning progress are continuous, and the dropouts are minimized. I hope I answered your question. Yeah, thank you. Over to you, Atik.
Thanks, Bharat. That was, yeah, no, very thorough. Just want to move on to the next question, and I think this is probably to CARE and AKF. So got a question from Camilla asking to hear more about how you managed to integrate DRR and climate change into the curricula, especially when taking into account the challenges in terms of girls' foundational skills. And so how did you perhaps approach this, and what interventions, how did you design the interventions to perhaps increase their awareness of climate change? So perhaps we can come to AKF first, Wakil.
Yes, I think that that was on the my suggestion, and we haven't done any kind of the intervention to have bring this climate change to our schools. That was my suggestion, that for our future program, and for we will have this in our mind to bring this to schools.
Okay, no worries. I know, Pin, you have the example of the climate change training through the Girls Education Network. Perhaps if you could say a little bit more on that. Is that okay, Bharat? Sorry, I know you answered the last one, and then
No,
we'll come to Care as well.
No,
See if
that's
they've got anything.
absolutely fine, fine, Atik. I mean, yeah. So in line with the school sector education plan that I mentioned in the chat box earlier. So one of the priority of the government itself is to form this network, Girls and Inclusive Education Network, that Atik just mentioned. So we work with other education stakeholders together with the ministries and department to formalize and also to operationalize this network. So other than mainstreaming and advocating for the education continuous learning, we have developed climate change adaptation and mainstreaming curriculum together with other GC partners and Nepal government. So we basically utilize that curriculum, the climate change adaptation curriculum, for these Girls and Inclusive Education Network members, so that for all the advocacy work they do for education, for like all the practices around addressing harmful social norms, and also the school enrollment and all of that. So together with all these different components, the climate change component is also included, so that when they do the advocacy, when they actually work with the local government, these are the basics. These are the basic agenda that they would advocate for the resource allocation, for the policy formulation, and also for to implementation. So we kind of are working in a way at a system level for climate change adaptation for that. And besides that, we are planning within the project to work with the community schools, especially in terms of school infrastructure vulnerability mapping for the flood and for drought, for earthquake and all of that, and also capacity mapping, and to support mostly around non-structural retrofitting. So it supports it doesn't require much of resources, but to better prepare and equip community school and the stakeholder as a preparedness. So we've been planning to do that with the school together, also to and support them with the school improvement plan, where we have been trying to work with the school management committee to incorporate this climate change agenda and the natural disaster preparedness and response plan within their annual school improvement plan. So most of our efforts are at the structural level, mostly with the advocacy and mobilization of all the community actors, including the Girls and Education Network member that we are working with. So yeah, over to you, Atik.
Thanks. And just to clarify, in terms of the material development, it was VSO, and what VSO did is that they worked with Mott MacDonald, who had a climate change project in Nepal operating at that time, and we looked at material from the UK, particularly in schools, there's a lot of sort of lesson plans on climate awareness in the UK, and so we looked at that and then adapted it, and then asked the climate change team from Mont McDonald to actually review that. And what we found was that actually the level that they were teaching in the UK was far higher than than what the girls could understand. And so we then worked with the VSO team to locally contextualize the training. So I think that was the approach that was taken for the GIE in training. So just to add to that, Care, do you have any examples?
Well, with regard to the integration of this into the curriculum for the students, I think that one we have not yet done, because curriculum is usually developed at the starting of the program and is approved by the Ministry of Education. So making changes along the way is another process. But now the other window that we are seeing, we can easily integrate and create awareness among the communities we are working with, is by integrating it into the training programs for the groups that we are working with, like girls empowerment forums, the community education committees that manage the schools, the boys empowerment forums. So these ones we can easily amend their training curriculum, so that during their training, the awareness of environmental and climate change issues are integrated. I can see Fadimata is raising her hand up. Probably she wants to add more.
Yes, Paul. I think in terms of the curriculum materials that we have, for instance, for the what is taught in the classrooms, there are subjects like, for instance, in the content for the non-formal as well as the non-formal education, as well as the AB curriculum, where there is subject about the weather, the climate change as a subject matter. But in terms of activities with the clubs, yes, I think we can do more around that for the Somalia context. But just to note that part of the activities of the Girls Empowerment Forums is inclusive of some of the activities that they can do within their communities and within their schools. But I just wanted to share an example of another non-GEC funded project that CARE has been implementing in Mali, which is quite similar to what Peoples in Need are doing in Nepal, where some part of the clubs that are established within the schools with the girls, they have the responsibility. They are trained. They have activities that they implement in terms of climate change, in terms of awareness as well. But also one thing that project did successfully in Mali was to develop with the Ministry of Education a tailored disaster reduction risk prevention curriculum content to be taught in the schools. And that was scaled up not only from that project. That project is intervening in the northern part of Mali, but that curriculum material was scaled up to other schools across Mali, because that part of Mali was really vulnerable to, of course, the ongoing drought, and now the ongoing conflict, and so many schools closed. So a lot of that, I think is a feature in terms of integrating climate change, but also integrating disaster risk prevention measures into education, going more beyond only what is taught in the classrooms, but also creating networks, but also building the capacity of learners and communities to respond and to plan and budget for things, including with the ministries of education. Thank you.
Thanks, Fadimata. That was really useful to hear about all those examples. We're running out of time, and I know there's some questions that haven't been answered, but I think what we'll do is we'll probably answer them over email now. I just want to bring in Camilla, who is from the FCDO climate change team. And Camilla, could you just provide an update in terms of where FCDO is at with climate change, and perhaps that linkage with education, just to let the people on the call know? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Atiq, and thank you so much for having me today. It's been a really rich and informative discussion, and I really appreciate the time from the project sharing the amazing work that you've been doing, and it's really grounding to kind of have the opportunity to hear from you guys. So thanks so much. So yeah, I'm the policy lead here at FCDO on the links between education and climate change. I'm an education advisor in the sort of girls' education department, but my specific policy is around those climate change links. So just to briefly say, 2021 for us was really about getting this agenda and those links on the agenda really internally, and also through the G7 and the Global Education Summit and at COP26. And some of you will have seen the event that the GEC participated in that we hosted at COP26. So I think you all know that the UK has huge climate commitments which were made at COP. In the integrated review, and of course on ICF. So we really have an imperative to be thinking about those links much more carefully. And my job is basically across this year to figure out what that means and to translate those commitments into something meaningful. And something I wanted to flag to you all is that we are working on a new policy position paper, which will set out FCDO's stall on this and help to guide what we do going forwards. And just to say a few words about that paper, it will come as no surprise to you that the learning crisis will be really front and centre. We'll be focusing very much on resilience and adaptation as in the main, because that's, the countries that we're working in are mostly needing to address those issues, but there will be a mitigation focus as well. We'll of course be thinking about kind of different types of climate challenges that countries are facing, and we've heard some really different examples today, which has been really helpful. And then maybe the most relevant bit to say for you all is that we will be taking a kind of case study approach to that paper, just to make sure that it remains really practical and grounded in what we think our FCDO teams, but also ministries of education and environment should be doing differently. And that's where I think the GEC will be really, really useful, as you have many examples already of how practically to address the challenges that climate poses to education. So yeah, just to say again, thank you so much. I'm working closely with Sherihan and with Emma on thinking about how we can save some of the learning from this session, and also look more broadly across the GEC portfolio. So you may see more of me, but yeah, just to say thank you so much and look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, Camilla, for that really useful update on what's going on internally, and I'm sure the GEC projects would love to contribute to that thinking within FCDO. Sherry, over to you on the next steps.
Yeah, just to thank everyone so much for their participation, and the presenters, AKF, PIN, CARE, everyone, our learning team, FCDO colleagues who made the time and kind of are bringing us into the policy discussion. Thank you, everyone, so much for making the time to engage on this very important conversation. I think our work here is not done. And one of the interesting things as I'm listening and also looking at the chat and how much interest is being generated around this topic, and also genuine, like, oh, what are you doing here? And how do you do that? And some questions we didn't get to. There's some follow-up for us. And I think we might need to get together in the form of a debrief, and basically our little working group around this webinar get together and see what our next steps are as far as a learning product that might be most useful to our audience, and also responsive to some of the questions that we didn't get to today. So we definitely are planning on that debrief. But in advance of that, we'd really love to hear from you on your feedback. You'll be getting a survey from our team on your impressions and questions and issues that have come out of this conversation. So please feel free to put all of your feedback in that survey. The other idea is to please keep on the lookout for the next aspects to our learning series. So we're going to have like basically a series of events, and accompanying those events, obviously some learning outputs and products, whether they are practice briefs, maybe it's a blog, maybe it's a technical brief. We're not sure yet. We're still building this plane while flying it, really. So do please follow us on Twitter and keep on the lookout for our next event, which should be scheduled for the end of May. And it's going to be around fragility sensitive approaches to safeguarding. So that'll be our next one. But like I said, please do also keep us in the loop on your feedback so we can make sure to embed that into any products that come out of this webinar. And then finally, if there's issues or other ideas that go beyond the survey, please do feel free to connect with us directly. Ellie, am I wrong? Is that the, I should have checked with you beforehand, but is that our learning team email address, and is that an appropriate way to get in touch with the learning team on other ideas? And perhaps, I mean, we've had 3 wonderful organizations and implementation and cases from today, but perhaps there's other people in the room that want to get more deeply engaged with us on this particular agenda and maybe paper that's coming forward. Ellie, would we be able to receive emails and engage through that? If there are people in the room that, for example, don't have my or Atik emails?
Yes, that's right. So people can write directly to the email address, but also if you can complete the short survey, and I've shared the link in the chat box, you're gonna also have a chance to sign up for our newsletters and communications around learning coming out of the JC, so we can stay in touch.
Perfect, perfect. Just want to make sure that any from our presenters, Atik, Ellie, anything else we're missing before we close?
No, just say the recording will be made available on the JC YouTube channel, and I will share the link to the channel here in the chat box.
Perfect.
And then one final thing, Sherry, if anyone is interested in being part of the community of practice, then please do get in touch with Sherry and I. We'd love to hear more of the examples and what's going on in relation to this. Thanks.
Great. Presenters, is there anything else that we, final words or comments, ideas? Okay. Well, thank you all so much again. I'm not going to close this so I can capture all the chat and copy and paste. Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate everyone's time. We'll be in touch. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Atik. Thanks all the presenters and everyone. That was great.
Thanks. Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.